I didn't start this war, I built a fence. That's it? But when the HOA sent their fake security boys to cut my wire, and then tried to steal my land, I answered with 8,000 volts of legal Texas electricity. They thought they could drag me to court. By the end, they were the ones begging for mercy. I've lived long enough to know one simple truth. Peace never lasts forever, not out here, not on land. That remembers more than what happens when you mess with Texas. My name is Clay Banner, and this stretch of sunburned Texas dirt. Every rock, every cedar stump, every post hole has carried the weight of my family since 1931. My grandpa carved the first fence line with a borrowed mule and hands that shook from the Great Depression. My father kept the place alive through droughts, cattle sickness, and a tornado that took half the barn roof, but somehow left the old windmill spinning like nothing happened. And now it's my turn, 120 acres. Just wide enough to breathe in. Just quiet enough to hear yourself think. Most mornings start the same. I step out onto the porch before the sun clears the ridge. The air still smells cold at that hour. Cedar dust and whatever the coyotes left behind on their night patrol. My boots find the same worn grooves along the porch boards, and my old dog Duke trots beside me, yawning like we're already behind schedule. By 6, I'm checking the cattle, tapping each water trough to hear if the levels dropped overnight. Then it's fence inspection, line by line, the same way my father taught me. Not because I expect trouble, just because trouble finds you faster if you stop looking. For most of my life, that routine was enough to keep the world at the right distance. The town knew me, the sheriff knew me, and the neighbors, well, the real neighbors, respected a man who worked his land and minded his business. But the world changed, or maybe it just shifted a little north, right up against my gate when the Clear Hill Acres development went up. Beyond my northern boundary, it rose overnight like a rash. Streets carved too straight, lawns trimmed too close, and houses stacked in perfect rows that never matched the curve of the land. They carved a road where cattle used to wander. They planted trees that had no business surviving Texas heat. And they filled those new homes with people who liked the idea of the countryside, without respecting the reality of it. At first, I didn't care. Let them water their lawns and post their neighborhood rules about mailbox colors and acceptable bird feeders. None of that had anything to do with me. My deed was older than their entire subdivision. My land was registered long before HOAs were a glimmer in some developer's eye. Still, something inside me tightened when I saw that road built so close to my fence line. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger either. It was that old rancher's instinct, the feeling you get when a storm's coming, but the sky still looks clear. So I decided to upgrade the northern fence. Not to provoke, not to posture. Just to draw a clean, strong line between a world of clipped hedges and a world that answers to sun. Soil and sweat, I sank every post myself. Treated cedar with steel core straight as rifle barrels. Ran the wire tight enough to hum when the wind shifted. Mounted solar cameras every 50 feet. Hung signs every 10 private property. No trespassing video surveillance. If a man can't understand that message, then the problem isn't the sign. By the time I finished, I stood back and wiped dust off my hands. The sun was dropping low, turning the whole fence into a copper line. Stretching toward the horizon, I felt something settle in my chest. Then a kind of quiet pride. But peace is fragile, and some folks can't stand seeing a line they didn't draw. It started small, a glance from a passing jogger. An SUV slowing down to stare longer than normal. A group of teenagers pointing at my cameras, like they were props in a theme park. I ignored it. I kept to my land. I kept to my cattle. I kept to what was mine. Then one morning I opened my mailbox and found an envelope so polished. It looked like it was afraid of dirt. Cream-colored embossed seal addressed not to Clay, but to property owner Northern Boundary Zone. No return address, just a name printed at the bottom. Bradley Sloan, President, Clear Hill Acres Homeowners Association. I didn't know him, didn't want to. Didn't need to. I stood there on my porch holding that envelope. The wind tugging at the corner like it had something to say, and for the first time, I felt that storm I'd sensed weeks earlier begin to gather, far off, quiet but real. I opened the envelope, read the first line, and laughed out loud. A long, slow, disbelieving laugh, because whatever war they thought they were starting, they had no idea who they were messing with. I remember standing there on the porch, the letter opened in my hands, Duke sitting at my boots like he was waiting for a verdict. The morning sun hadn't even burned off the haze yet, but my day was already heading downhill. The letter was written in a tone that tried real hard to sound official. That kind of polished language folks use when they want to boss you around without sounding like they're bossing you around. It said my newly installed fence was non-compliant with the established aesthetic standards of the Clear Hill Acres community. It went on to say I was required to remove unauthorized visual obstructions within 30 days to preserve neighborhood harmony. Neighborhood harmony that one got a snort out of me. There are a lot of ways to describe my land rugged. Dusty, sun-baked. Stubborn but harmonious ain't one of them. And it sure as hell wasn't part of their neighborhood. I finished my coffee, folded the letter in half, set it on the kitchen table, and went on with my day like it was a piece of junk mail. Because that's what it was. A mistake. Someone checked the wrong box on their clipboard and sent the wrong letter to the wrong man. But 2 weeks later, the second envelope showed up. This one wasn't polite, it wasn't even pretending. Bigger envelope, heavier paper. Same glossy HOA seal stamped on the front, like they were trying to make it look like a government document. I brought it inside, sat down at the table, and slid a pocket knife under the flap. Duke wandered over and laid his head on my knee, like he could smell trouble coming before I even finished reading. Inside was a formal notice of continued violation. A whole packet of printed pages, paragraphs written like someone had swallowed a legal dictionary. It said my failure to respond constituted non-compliance. It said I was creating a public safety concern. It said the HOA was prepared to escalate matters. And tucked in the back a small, blurry satellite map with a thick red outline drawn around the northern edge of my property, as if it belonged to them. That part didn't make me laugh. I stared at that red line, then out of the window toward the ridge, and a slow warmth crept up the back of my neck. Not anger, not yet. Just that rancher's sense again. The one that tells you something ain't right. So I wrote back, not on some fancy stationery, not on printer paper on a page torn out of a lined notebook, the kind kids use in middle school. I wrote in all caps, partly to annoy them, partly because it felt right. I told them my land wasn't part of Clear Hill Acres, never had been, never would be. I attached a photocopy of my deed, my parcel registration, and the historic boundary map. That's been on file longer than every person in that HOA's lifetime, combined. Then I signed the bottom clay banner owner. Independent as hell, God bless Texas. I folded it, slid it into a plain white envelope, and mailed it off. And for a week or two, things got quiet again. The kind of quiet that makes you think maybe, just maybe, common sense has prevailed. But trouble, real trouble, doesn't knock on your front door. It doesn't call ahead. It doesn't leave a voicemail. Sometimes it climbs your fence in broad daylight. Sometimes it carries bolt cutters. And sometimes it shows up wearing a polo shirt with a fake security badge stitched on the chest. But I didn't know that part yet. Because back then, sitting at my kitchen table with the second letter folded beside my plate, I thought the storm was fading. Turns out it was just gathering strength. It was a Thursday afternoon when the first motion alert buzzed on my phone. I remember because I was knee-deep in mud, working on a stubborn water valve that had been leaking since spring. Duke barked once, just one sharp, low sound, and looked north. I pulled off my gloves, swiped the phone, and the camera feed popped up. 2 men standing right at my fence line. HOA polos tucked into khaki pants, like they were going to a job interview at a lawn care company. One was tall and skinny, the kind of man who looked like he'd blow over in a Texas windstorm. The other one, heavier, set red in the face,